Good afternoon. As introduced, my name is Dietrich. I'm a first-year master's student here at UNBC. So the project I'm going to be talking about is kind of nascent and going to be kind of high level. But I'm going to be talking about my thesis research question on the process of systematic conservation planning and its parallel development with a research application in the form of an online decision support tool for conservation. I'll start with my two related questions, the thesis research question and the web tool application it's relating to. My research question is about how conservation planning might change given different geographic scales and subject to different grouping units in scenario analysis. I'll talk a little bit about the systematic conservation planning process and the problems faced by planners making conservation decisions and the limits of the methods we're currently using. And all of this sets the stage for the Conservation Adaptive Planning for British Columbia web tool in development, which we're designing to answer some of these challenges. What's appealing about this project is the co-development, because it's an opportunity to make real impacts while doing research. My thesis research question is how to scale and planning extent affect conservation solutions. While the web tool application will look to answer whether we can optimize systematic conservation planning for practitioners in British Columbia. My thesis work will provide much of the preloaded data and a troubleshooting opportunity for the web tool, while the tool provides a platform for exploring and explaining my research question. We know that the targets that we set alter the conservation solution outputs. My thesis research focuses on how the boundaries we draw at the outset of planning affect the results across the larger landscape. For example, ecologists tend to conduct studies with ecological boundaries such as the ecoregions, shown on the left. And government decisions are more often based on administrative boundaries like the Natural Resource District boundary on the right. Neither of these are used consistently, especially on the government side. There are a slew of different administrative boundaries used for different analyses, sometimes combined, nothing ever the same way. Guys. Though the same biodiversity values exist no matter how the lines are drawn, the richness and the distribution of those features may be considered or captured differently depending on the way that we group them to evaluate them in the first place. So, as an example data set, this is the antelope winter range for mountain goat in British Columbia. Same spatial data set, of course, in teal on both, but bounded differently and therefore will be considered differently based on the scenario analysis you run. If I run a scenario analysis in one ecoregion versus one natural resource district, you might weight that differently, or the algorithm output might consider it differently or consider it a priority or not based on those. We do anticipate that the ecological boundary will contain better clustering of biodiversity, as you can kind of see here, while the administrative units will capture more overall diversity since they're not based on ecological boundaries. When those grouping unit boundaries are dissolved, how do the optimization priorities change for the same values across the province? So when you run the same optimization with the same targets and values for each of your biological data sets, do they align with the same way as when you prioritize them based on group units? And when we dissolve the final administrative boundary, how do the priorities shift in the context of the wider landscape? When we scale out from the individual units, there should be greater efficiency across the system, in this case, the province. My research will explore whether the ecological or the administrative scale, or neither, are more representative of the wider picture. Conserving biodiversity is primarily achieved through the designation of protected areas, and that's what we're running these optimizations to elicit. And the boundaries are the first things we draw when we begin the conservation planning process. In this process, we use spatial analysis to identify conservation priorities, and it begins with an understanding of the conservation goals of the plan and input from relevant stakeholders. For this exercise, we'll use species representation as our example conservation values. From there, we assign relevant targets to these values as a measure of how much of each we're looking to conserve. We then evaluate if and how conservation meets these targets. With this information, we can then select additional complementary conservation areas that meet the goals and targets we set. Outside entities then, we hope, take the results to implement conservation actions and to work to maintain the conservation values therein. That kind of seems like a simple enough project, very linear, very logical. Why do we need a tool to help make these decisions? Oh, this is where there's an extra animation. There we go. The decision problem for conservation is big. This is a simplified 10 by 30 pixel landscape. Right? We can decide to protect or not to protect each pixel on the grid. The green selected pixels here are one possible conservation solution scenario. Pop quiz question. Can anyone guess how many solution sets are possible on this grid to create a network of protected areas?
2 to the 30?
2 to the 30.
300?
42?
I like it. That was the closest answer I think I've gotten. The answer is 2 times 10 to the power of 90, which is greater than the number of known atoms in the universe. With all the ecological knowledge that we do have, it is impossible to design an optimal solution, even on a 10 by 30 grid, without some help in the computing department. The CAPDC web tool brings together recent advancements to solve this problem. It provides a common basis of preloaded data. It's flexible and accessible to users without specialized training in things such as Marksand and other decision support tools. It democratizes both the data and the process by being online and open access. The tool is also province-wide, facilitating use by ministries, NGOs, and other planners at scale who are also partners in the development of the tool. As far as we can tell, CAPDC will be the first tool of its kind with preloaded data. And because it's built from decision support technology, along with history linear programming and cloud-based solvers, a user is going to be able to run this tool, get the solution, tweak the input, run it again, get answers again, and so forth in real time, rather than waiting hours, days for an optimization to run. Because of this functionality, the web tool is also an ideal way to explore my research question about extent and scale. British Columbia is kind of a large landscape, as you might have noticed. In my lab, it's a small landscape. Most people are working global around the Canada scale, but it's big enough that it's going to take some time. So making tweaks and adjustments on the fly are going to be necessary to see how these scenarios change. At the end of the day, we'll have complementary outputs from this research. We'll answer a yet unasked question that is critical to the effectiveness of conservation planning exercises as the stakes are rising for biodiversity. Through our partnerships, the CAPDC web tool will facilitate faster and more accessible conservation planning for users anywhere in the province. And in doing so, we'll be able to build a tool that is replicable elsewhere. So this tool can be rebuilt to be used in other provinces, other countries, in the States, and places nearby with the same exercises that are necessary. That's me.